Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
Before I get started, I am required to let you know that the Securities and Exchange Commission, as a matter of policy, disclaims responsibility for any private publication or statement made by any of its employees, and that includes me. The views expressed herein are those of my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Commission or of my colleagues on the staff of the Commission. So now that's out of the way, and I'd like to tell you more about the SEC. So the SEC has been going through a major transformation since the financial crisis of 2008. Everyone knows about our failure to catch Bernie Madoff. But since then, though, we have gone from an agency that was manual and reactive to one that is analytical and proactive. Proactive in processing the information that we receive on a daily basis, as well as proactive in advancing technology to review the information that we're requesting a lot more quickly than we did before. This isn't just because of past crises, it's also because of the amount of data that the market generates, the market that the SEC regulates, and that data has increased exponentially over the last few years. Just for one example, we've gone from an average of 11 million trades on the New York Stock Exchange per day in 2008 to an average of 32 million in 2014. That's over a 200% increase. I'd like to also just take a minute and show you what that looks like for us. So what we're seeing here, this is a time lapse of high-frequency trading, which is trading done by computers using algorithms. And these are all of the stock exchanges in the United States. And the time lapse is going to show us the total volume over a single day of trading from 2007 until 2012. So let's just take a few seconds and watch what happens. So this will keep going, and it'll give you a picture of what we're dealing with on a daily basis. This is a lot for us to oversee, and it's just one example of the reality that the SEC must protect. We've had to move to the concept of big data. That's the process of seeing, reviewing, analyzing everything all at once, whether that everything is an entire trading market or just one individual case. The SEC, we've been bringing over 700 cases a year for the last several years. And each of those cases, they come with their own mountain of facts. I've had cases with 500,000 transactions and cases with 10 million documents. And we have to take all of those facts and turn them into evidence rather quickly because, again, we're painfully aware of what happens if we don't do that. So I was lucky enough to join the SEC as a forensic accountant in 2010. And it was exciting for me because I get to do what I love on a daily basis, which is sit behind the computer and look at spreadsheets. But I get to do it in service of my country and at an agency that has been encouraging innovation and innovative thinking in its staff. I've gotten to contribute to bringing better data and better technology directly to the frontline staff and helping us to conduct exams and conduct cases a lot faster. So the SEC is making huge strides in technology, infrastructure, and architecture, but more important than that, we're placing a great importance on equipping the frontline staff with better weapons. Technology for us, it's becoming the underpinning that's making our agency more effective at our mission. It's not only giving us more actual power to understand the data that the market we regulate generates, but it's serving as a preventative measure. Those we regulate now know what's empowering us and are going to think twice before committing a violation. So the SEC has realized that technology rarely means the most expensive or flashy tool. It's often the very simple tools in the hands of the right staff that can transform our daily work. So I'd like to tell you about the SEC's investigation of a recent Ponzi scheme, and how we used technology and obtained key data in a different format, and how those changes led to this investigation being one of the fastest to go from case opening to final judgment in SEC history. But first, just a quick refresher, what is a Ponzi scheme? I know you've all heard the term, but in its usual form, a Ponzi scheme is a fraud where investors believe that they're putting their money into something legitimate, something profitable, But in actuality, the Ponzi schemer uses the investors' money to pay interest or dividends to old investors, and then siphons the rest of the money for other personal benefit. So the scheme usually falls apart when the fraudster can't entice new investors to pay back old ones. This scheme is not complex. I've heard Ponzi schemes being called caveman fraud. They're not sophisticated, but their lack of complexity doesn't reduce the damage that they cause. And Ponzi schemes are often result in huge losses for rather inexperienced investors. So before our technology transformation, even run-of-the-mill simple cases like a small Ponzi scheme were taking us an inordinate amount of time, and trusting investors were losing money. There's current academic research out there that shows the average age of a Ponzi schemer is about 61, and the majority of victims are friends and family and neighbors that the schemer trusts. So people who know the schemer personally. This kind of fraudster he's not young or slick or fancy. He's usually your neighbor or your golfing buddy or your son's hockey coach. So in some way, it's an even more dangerous kind of fraud for us because there's a trust that's already there that is leading people to be gullible and entrust their money into a scheme like this. So the story I'd like to tell you about, the fraudster actually owned the local ice cream shop. So we're going to West Roxbury, Massachusetts, a neighborhood of Boston, where Stephen Palladino and his family ran a small ice cream shop right in the center of town. This is the grand opening a few years ago. Mr. Palladino also, on the side, ran a lending service. And that service was funded by investments entrusted to him by friends and family and neighbors. And with that money, he made loans to developers and small businesses at very high interest rates and used profit from those interest rates to pay back investors. Or so he said that's what he did. In March 2013, the Massachusetts State Police actually indicted Mr. Palladino and his company on a variety of charges related to the alleged lending business. I think they actually called him an open and notorious thief in the allegations. We, the SEC, we opened our investigation as soon as we received the state police referral in 2013. And our primary concern was protecting investor assets. How much money did he raise from investors, and what happened to that money? And if it doesn't exist anymore, then is there a way that we can get it back to investors? So what do? In Ponzi schemes, first and foremost, we summarize where the money came from and how that money was used. So in this case, we identified several bank accounts controlled by Mr. Palladino and sent subpoenas to obtain the statements. And then we got back this. This is my office. This is how it usually looks. But these were the papers and the binders from this case. So we got back about 7 bankers' boxes of paper statements. That's about 35,000 sheets of paper. I guess that's not that much. I've got cases of 10 million sheets of paper, but still, this is a lot of paper cuts. So how long would it have taken for us to analyze all of these bank statements? I don't know, but a lot longer than it should take, and a lot longer than we had if we wanted to secure any money or assets that might be available to pay back investors. Also, this seems like an unnecessary problem. Why in 2013 is the government still sifting through paper bank statements? All of us have been downloading our bank statements into Excel online since 1999, so why isn't the government getting information in the form that it needs? And all of us at the SEC, and I'm sure many of you in the audience, often wonder the same thing. And the answer is also one that's probably familiar to us too. This was just the route that was always taken. Paper was just the way that it was always done. It was a dark and quite arduous road, but we always got to our destination. We still got evidence and still brought cases successfully. Also, the other roads to get to where we wanted to go, they seemed to have a lot of traffic too. We could buy conversion software that turned paper to Excel, but if anyone knows the federal rules of acquisition, that's a whole different kind of adventure altogether. But over the last few years, the SEC has decided to take those unfamiliar avenues. The first street we drove down was the technology store. Now, nobody let me just go and use my credit card and buy what I wanted, but we did make the effort, and we did invest in software that converted 35,000 sheets of paper like that in a matter of just about 3 hours. And that's instead of the several weeks that it would have taken of manual entry if we hadn't had that tool. We also made another stop on our transformation trip, and that was to go directly to the banks producing the statements and negotiate with them to get the information in the electronic format that we needed. This one was a bit tougher to navigate, and it left us a little bit incredulous too. The most sophisticated, most wealthy financial institutions in the world, they sent us boxes of paper. I mean, how crazy is that they would print out and mail paper? So several staff, with the support of our division director himself, we negotiated with several of the largest banks in the world to change their subpoena processing system. So just like we in the government had silos, so too did the banks. It took us about a year of negotiating and then explaining and collaborating and finally testing and approving, but we convinced one of the biggest banks in the world to change their technology so that they could provide us the information in the format that we needed. So in this Ponzi scheme, thanks to ongoing efforts to obtain the statements electronically, as well as our new software, we were able to convert the records quickly, and in just 2 weeks' time, the team and I were able to determine exactly how much money came into Mr. Palladino and his business, and what actually happened to that money. So what did we find? We found that there was no substantial lending business, and about $10 million of investor money, it went partially back to investors, but it mainly went to cars and vacations and jewelry and gambling and a lot of other illicit affairs. So a case like this, which spanned over 4 years of fraudulent activity across multiple bank accounts, it would have previously taken us several weeks to fully trace out. But what we actually did was we opened the case in March, and we were able to file an emergency action just 1 month later. So we filed a temporary restraining order and an asset freeze in order to secure any assets that were available. After we filed the emergency action, we did spend the next several weeks speaking to investors, getting their statements, refining our bank statement analysis, tracing a lot of cash that apparently was also exchanged in little white envelopes, but I think we found it all. And once we did that, we were so confident that our analysis was complete and accurate, mainly because of the format that we got our data, that we decided to bypass a jury trial altogether, and we moved to the judge for final judgment from herself. And we were actually granted that in July of 2013. So if anyone is in law enforcement, you know cases don't go from opening to final judgment in 3.5 months. So what did the judge decide? She did find Mr. Palladino liable for the fraud charges that we filed. It was clear up until the very last moments before the scheme fell apart that he was soliciting new investors quite desperately to keep the farce going. One of the last investors at the bottom of the scheme, she was actually one of his closest friends' grandmothers. And she had trusted her life savings to Mr. Palladino because she thought she was turning that into something bigger that she could pass on to her grandchildren. Unfortunately, a lot of the money was gone by the time we and the police got there, but in this case, it was clear that if the fraud had continued, much more would have been lost, and there would have been many more investors that could have been harmed. So our work then supported the state police's investigation because they unfortunately don't have the same resources that we do. And a few months later, in January of 2014, Mr. Palladino actually pled guilty to the state police charges as well, and the judge sentenced him to 10 years in prison, which he is serving right now. Again, this was one of the fastest Ponzi schemes that we've ever investigated, and it's reflective of our changing culture at the Commission. We've placed a deliberate focus on staff who are actually conducting the investigations and finding the right tools to help us do the jobs that we already do so well even better. And we're not just changing the way that we work, but we're changing the way that people work with us and demanding information the way that we need it. The change at the SEC, it's been happening from the top and the bottom, in the home office and in the regions. I work in the Boston office, and I've gotten to be an integral part of the transformation that we're going through right now. The staff on the front line, we keep demanding ways to let us do our jobs faster. And SEC leadership continues to cultivate a culture that encourages innovative thinking. And our leadership has given us the freedom and the flexibility to bring new tools and new information to our daily work. We as a commission, we do understand now the consequences of not transforming. And we know that we can't make a case without evidence, and if we can't get through the evidence fast enough, investors continue to get harmed. So with this recognition, we are investigating cases faster. We are bringing relief faster to investors, and this is giving us more time to catch bad guys than we had before. Thank you so much.